gather round while I sing you of Wernher von Braun, a man whose allegiance is ruled by expedience. Call him a Nazi, he won't even frown. Nazi schmazi, says Wernher von Braun.
Wernher von Braun. He was America's favorite rocket scientist. He was known by millions as the father of space travel and regarded as a true American hero. Among other honors and accolades, von Braun was inducted into the International Aerospace Hall of Fame, the National Aviation Hall of Fame, was awarded the Langley Gold Medal, the NASA Distinguished Service Medal, the Golden Plate Award of the American Academy of Achievement, the Civitan International World Citizenship Award, and the National Medal of Science. But von Braun also had a secret, one that NASA kept quiet for decades. Von Braun had been brought to America after World War II under the top-secret Operation Paperclip program. Von Braun had been a decorated Sturmbannführer officer in the SS. NASA upheld his image as an American hero, but remained silent about the details of his past. Von Braun worked closely under Heinrich Himmler, one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich, towards advancing Germany's ballistic missile program. Von Braun personally presented the concept of the V-2 missile to Hitler, who later said,
Von Braun spoke without a trace of timidity and with boyish-sounding enthusiasm. The V-2 is a measure that can decide the war. And what encouragement to the home front when we attacked the English with it.
The V-2 missile was the most advanced flying weapon in existence. The missile was 46 feet long and carried a warhead with up to 1,000 pounds of explosives. It could travel a distance of 190 miles at 5 times the speed of sound. It resulted in the death of over 9,000 people during World War II, most of whom were civilians. To celebrate the V-2 success, Hitler hosted a banquet in honor of the V-2 designers, Wernher von Braun, Walter Riedel, and Major General Walter Dornberger. They were presented with Hitler's highest non-combat decorations, the Knight's Cross of the War Service Cross. Von Braun had been awarded the War Merit Cross First Class with Swords the prior year. As the banquet went on, V-2 rockets were fired from mobile launch pads on the front lawn. 1,200 people were killed in Antwerp that evening from von Braun's vengeance weapon. In the world's largest subterranean factory, called the Mittelwerk, slave laborers struggled to meet von Braun's quota to manufacture 200 V-2 missiles a day. More people died building the V-2 missiles than those killed by it. 20,000 prisoners died at the slave labor camp, the majority from starvation, disease, and intolerable working conditions.
My refusal to join the Nazi Party would have meant I would have had to abandon the work of my life. Therefore, I decided to join. My membership in the party did not involve any political activity.
But I didn't know we were going to go to a concentration camp or even get close to it. Nordhausen was a confinement camp for workers. Nobody was shot or they all starved to death. They were Polish and French and Russian workers that worked on the V-2 bomb at Nordhausen. This factory in the mountains, in the tunnels, they were building V-2 bombs as fast as they could inside this tunnel. It was all underground. The German in the city said they couldn't know, and they didn't know anything about the camp, yet you could smell the stench of the dead people 7-8 miles away. You never expect to see the things that we saw going through there. I mean, where the dead were just stacked up. And I've been seeing dead people before. People got shot. But here they were just lying, nothing but skin and bones. And they'd been lying there maybe for weeks or even months. It still bothers me. Lower Middlebelt. We just knew it as Nordau. What I saw was all of these dead people laid outdoors. They're on the ground. And it looked like acres of them. Medics were in there, and they had all of these people that were nearly dead. They were just barely alive. I know I didn't see all of it. What we didn't see at all was the underground factories that they had. See, that was back under the Hartz Mountains, and these were slave laborers who were working on the V1s, and I think also the V2s. You know, you can't hardly imagine that kind of brutality, you know.
Annie Jacobsen wrote international bestseller book Operation Paperclip. Rocket assembly was dependent on workers, and the slave laborers in Nordhausen were now dying at an ever-increasing rate. Von Braun had to have known this. He visited the underground tunnels in an official capacity 10 times during the winter of 1945. Scholars at the Smithsonian revealed a letter von Braun wrote to Alban Savatsky, manager of the V2 production, admitting that he personally picked labor slaves from the Buchenwald concentration camp, whom he admitted in an interview 25 years later had been in pitiful shape.
The Meister immediately started shouting it was sabotage, when just at that point, von Braun arrived accompanied by his usual group of people. Without even listening to my explanations, he ordered the Meister to have me given 25 strokes in his presence by an SS who was there. Then, judging that the strokes weren't sufficiently hard, he ordered I be flogged more vigorously, and his order was then diligently carried out. I think it's pertinent to point out that I knew who von Braun was because he had already come into our hall for rapid inspections. He couldn't fail to see the abominable conditions of the deportees and his inhumanity, I would say his cruelty, of which I was personally a victim, I would say, an eloquent testimony to his Nazi fanaticism.
Shortly after American forces liberated Dora in 1945, a U.S. Army War Criminal Investigation Unit arrived. They questioned prisoners and searched for evidence against those responsible for the deaths of over 20,000 men. At the same time, a wave of U.S. Army technical intelligence teams swept through. They searched for V2 rockets, technical documents, and the rocket scientists who had worked at the Mittelwerk factory. In the end, the same men that the technical intelligence team sought were the same men wanted by the War Crime Unit. However, the V2 rocket scientists weren't captured. They eagerly turned themselves in to the Technical Intelligence Unit, confident that the U.S. Army would be willing to overlook their heinous war crimes in return for their scientific knowledge.
The V2 was something we had and you didn't have. Naturally, you wanted to know all about it.
Over 1,600 engineers and scientists were quietly taken to America in the top-secret Operation Paperclip. Among them, Wernher von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, and Walter Riedel, all of whom would one day work at the Santa Susana Field Lab in California. Von Braun and his team were given contracts to work for the U.S. War Department, provided they were not known or alleged war criminals. One of the ground rules for bringing the Nazis to America was that it would be temporary. After the exploitation of their scientific knowledge, they were to be immediately sent back to Germany. But this did not sit well with everyone, even with the strict terms for their temporary work in the U.S.
That these men were directly or indirectly linked with a regime whose infamous record included, among other things, the most brutal persecution of free science, must fill every citizen, and in particular, every scientist, with deep apprehension.
Von Braun and his German associates were brought to work in New Mexico, but they didn't immediately pledge their allegiance to America. There were rumors of sabotage and secret Russian alliances. Several rocket scientists received large sums of money from unknown sources, along with coded messages from South America. Wernher von Braun was caught secretly mailing a map to a contact in Germany showing the location of some of the V2 documents he hid during the war. During an interview for potential paperclip candidates, Army Lieutenant Walter Jessel discovered that von Braun was conspiring with others to withhold information from U.S. officers. Jessel concluded it would be an obvious absurdity to accept them into America under the Paperclip program. But von Braun was accepted and welcomed into America with open arms. He would go on to work on the U.S. Army's Redstone and Jupiter ballistic missiles, as well as the Jupiter C, Juno 2, and Saturn I launch vehicles. He was the chief architect of the Saturn V launch rocket. NASA appointed him director of the Marshall Space Flight Center. A new trial began for Mittelbau-Dora war crimes, the slave labor camp that built von Braun's V-2 missiles. Von Braun was called to trial in Germany, but NASA refused to send him. When the war crime prosecutor arranged to come to America to take von Braun's testimony in person, the U.S. denied his visa. Wernher von Braun eventually testified, but it was on American soil with a NASA-approved German judge. The U.S. Army promptly sealed his testimony, and the public remained in the dark to his Nazi past. In 1952, Wernher von Braun published the science fiction book Mars, A Technical Tale. Soon after, Walt Disney's popular television series Disneyland featured von Braun and his imaginative space shuttles and space station concepts in several episodes. But life in America wasn't all magic and imagination. 60 miles from Disneyland, in the quiet town of Simi Valley, America was secretly preparing for the Cold War. Cold War intercontinental ballistic missile engines were tested at the Santa Susana Field Lab, formerly known as Rocketdyne. Many of the engines had been designed by von Braun, and he frequently visited the site. Walter Riedel, who Hitler honored along with von Braun, assisted in the design of 6 major rocket test stands at the field lab. An oral history project conducted by NASA included former Santa Susana employee Bill Vietinghoff, who said, "The Germans did help us. Someone said that we saved 10 years in the development time by bringing the Germans over to show us what they did and tell us what we should do to avoid the mistakes they made. So, that was their value." There were 2 gentlemen working at Santa Susana who had come over with Wernher von Braun in Operation Paperclip, Walter Riedel, whom I got to see but I never worked with, and another gentleman named Dieter Husel. He was a very brilliant engineer who worked on the German A4 engine, and I got to know him. Von Braun used to come up there a lot. He wasn't working for Rocketdyne, but he would come up as a consultant. NASA used the Santa Susana Field Lab for rocket testing until 2006.
Over 30,000 rocket engine tests occurred at SSFL, which resulted in significant contamination to the soil and groundwater. A highly carcinogenic chemical, trichloroethylene, or TCE, was the primary solvent used for cleaning the rocket engine components. However, due to faulty containment ponds, 800,000 gallons of TCE were lost into the soil. Nuclear accidents on other portions of the lab owned by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and subsequently the Department of Energy resulted in dangerous radioactive contamination of the soil and groundwater. Today, the Santa Susana Field Lab remains one of the most toxic sites in California and the site of one of America's worst nuclear meltdowns.
In 2010, the Department of Energy and NASA both signed legally binding agreements promising to clean up their portions of the site completely by 2017. That meant that all detectable contamination in the soil would be removed and the site essentially restored to the condition it was in when before these entities polluted it. And that was supposed to be completed by 2017. As we speak, we're in 2020, and not only has it not been completed, soil cleanup has not even begun. NASA is proposing in the EIS to leave 80 to 88% of the acreage not cleaned up. Their preferred alternative would result in the great majority of the site not being cleaned up. It is one of the most toxic places in the country.
The extent of the contamination, especially the nuclear contamination, was kept as a closely guarded secret until a UCLA student found proof of a meltdown at the lab.
13 of 43 fuel rods partially melted. 81 pieces of uranium.
Nearly 60 years later, NASA continues to deny that the contamination poses any risk to human health.
I do not reproach this man with not having made public confessions after the war. I do not hold it against the scientists who did not choose to be martyrs when they discovered the truth about the death camps. No, mine is a modest objective. I make my stand solely against the monstrous distortion of history which, in silencing certain facts and glorifying others, has given birth to false, foul, and suspect myths.
Don't say that he's hypocritical. Say rather that he's apolitical. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Wernher von Braun. Some have harsh words for this man of renown, but some think our attitude should be one of gratitude, like the widows and cripples in old London town, who owe their large pensions to Wernher von Braun. You too may be a big hero, once you've learned to count backwards to zero. In German or English, I know how to count down, and I'm learning Chinese, says Wernher von Braun.